Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Distracted Spectrum. I'm here today with Willie Carver, author of Gay Poems for Red States, one of the books that is probably, it is trending everywhere that I see. I feel like every time I turn on social media, I see either something from your book or you roasting JD Vance on a news article. We are both from a very similar area of the world. Me from Hazard, Kentucky, where I was born in Harlan, grew up in Hazard, then lived in Jenkins. And you were also fellow Appalachian. So, what part of the mountains are you
So I'm from
from?
Floyd County, Martin, Kentucky, which is probably what, half an hour, not even half an hour, 20 minutes from Hazard. So
Yeah,
effectively the same place.
yeah. Oh, I played you on football.
You didn't play me because I certainly didn't go to a game. First football game I ever went to was part of a custody dispute. The courts insisted that a friend of mine create an opportunity for her son's father to see him, and she chose a football game, and I went out of moral support.
And that is so fitting.
But glad to be here.
It's And so you grew up in the mountains, you know the culture well. It's also no secret if you can't tell by his glasses. And the name of his book, um, that he was the gay kid up the holler. Um, so his experiences in Appalachia, the good, bad, and the ugly. Um, we're here to kind of paint the picture and tell the story, and both of us have great and bad experiences there. um but the outside world often gets the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst. I mean, even History Channel and their moonshine and stuff, like the picture that the outside world gets, even down to Turtle Man, is not what Kentuckians is, and it certainly is not what Appalachians is. You're talking about the people who brought you unions. You're talking about, the original rednecks were union working, coal mining, 40% African, the rest Scott, Irish, Dutch, Italian, French. Like, you're talking about the hardest working group of people probably on the planet. Um, Probably the hardest. Like, if we were to be invaded in some crazy war, you ain't getting past our mountains. Um,
Ain't that the truth?
it's just a fact. You got a bunch of rednecks that blend in with the trees, with perfectly sighted in things that go pew pew, um, and clink clank. Um, you won't even see us. So tell us, about Appalachia, your family. How long has your family been there? And I'll touch on mine in a little bit, but let's get us started.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this.
So the short answer is a long time. If you take my mom's family, because I did the boring genealogy, depending upon which route you want to take, the fun thing was when you do the genealogy, they break it down in a bunch of different ways, and like there's the known group that you most connect to, I guess, genetically. And over and over and over, it was Appalachian Settler Group number one, Appalachian Settler Group number two. It wasn't until like
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
seventh or eighth that it started being some other group that I'm genetically related to because I have so much Appalachian Settler Group genetics. So forever is the short answer. And the funny thing is, I don't even know. Like looking at it now, it's hard for me really to describe what being Appalachian was without starting at coming out as gay, because coming out as gay is drawing a circle around yourself, clearly separating yourself from other people, and then once you do that, you can better see those other people who have drawn that circle around themselves. It's a way of kind of like literally I'm wearing rainbow glasses. It's a way of marking yourself so that you can see yourself for the first time and know yourself for the first time. And I think when you do that, you get things like gay culture, gay slang. You get initiated into sort of what it means to be queer, which necessarily means like what it means not to be queer.
Right.
And that's as much culture as anything else is. And after that experience of sort of becoming something, then I started realizing how that's exactly how Appalachian works. You draw, because Appalachians are so maligned, mocked, straight up used as the fodder for anything people want to blame usually poor people on.
Which was done intentionally by the U.S. government, by the way,
There,
after the Cold Wars.
there's and it goes back really even further over and over
Further
and
than
over.
that, yeah, it's like the 1870s.
Yeah, it's this idea that white people needed to paint themselves as superior, yet here are these hillbillies who don't act and do the way who don't share their values. So
No, and they're mixed racing. They're marrying indigenous. They're marrying African. They're marrying Dutch. They're not staying within their tribes. These people are crazy.
yeah, so they draw that line to create this idea that there's some sort of lower class, right? And so it occurred to me, the irony here is that in an effort to protect themselves, a lot of Appalachian people were drawing really tight lines around Appalachia so that they wouldn't have to confront anything from outside of Appalachia. And the bigger irony is that things that were traditionally Appalachian, like not having as much racial hang up as the rest of the country, like being much more sexually free than the rest of the country, like not having religious hang up. If you look at Henry Coddle's Night Comes to the Cumberlands, he painted, even as late as 1930s, Appalachia as a place that by and large rejected organized religion while being Christian. Suddenly,
because they didn't trust any systems. You got, because of their wars. I mean, Appalachia is African, Appalachian is French, Appalachian is Scot, and it is Irish. And then Northern Appalachian is Pennsylvania Dutch, and that's a whole different section. But they didn't trust. The red bandana, the redneck term, that came from us redheads saying "F you" to the King of England. We're going to do religion our own way. And so we didn't. It wasn't until the Second Great Awakening that even it started like being trusted, really.
So and one of my favorite stories about how that mindset just early on got started was, you already had the trouble with the Scots and the trouble with the Irish from the English perspective. Obviously, the trouble was the English the entire time. So when these settlers were coming over into the Appalachian Mountains, they were like, great, we don't have to deal with the English anymore. And so I don't remember who went first. I'll say Scottish, but it might have been the Irish. But one ethnic group had already gone in. And then the English were like, okay, we're just going to take that land and give it to the other. So the Scots were there, so they gave it to the Irish, or the Irish were there, so they gave it to the Scots. And they sent them in. And then when they got there, they were like, they really think we're going to kill each other? There's all this space. Let's just marry each other. And that's where our accent comes from.
And there was a few people groups. There was French, which often gets overlooked in Appalachia, but I'll tell you, you'll be a hard pressed to find a Appalachian that doesn't have French ancestry. Like if you have the last name Combs, you French, my man, my lady, my in between. Like the word Melungeon itself is a French word meaning a people of mixture. And so, you had all these people that the English didn't like got sent to Appalachia.
So when I think about myself as a queer person, then I think, okay, so the irony is that even though, and there's the Foxfire series does a lot of talk about this, I forget his name, but he was a queer Appalachian writer who left Knott County, went to Manhattan, and then was basically like, oh, this was 1960s, but he basically said this is regressive. Y'all are obsessed with roles and identity and top, bottom, sub, whatever. So he was like, Knott
Mhm.
County was doing this way better, and they were thankfully freer. Um, but because suddenly, liberal white Californians were discovering queerness, Appalachians labeled it as something outside Appalachian. And then it becomes the hated thing. And so I become the hated thing from the people who love me for being a part of Appalachia. And that's not unique to here. We see the same thing in Africa, where a lot of places that were colonized by the United Kingdom, which had rich traditions of LGBTQ identities, suddenly are thinking of LGBTQ identities as something inherently Western and are rejecting them. So when you look at Uganda, when we look at Kenya, we're looking
Yeah.
at places that don't even realize that they are actually taking on the belief system of the oppressor, and have actually lost their own identity in doing so.
Right. I mean, Rome was so gay.
Hmm. Yes.
I even Sparta, like the thing that they left out of the movie was that Spartans was
Yes.
the night before,
Yes.
and um, and so
Mm-hmm.
they had this belief that you will fight harder for your lover, um, and that's the actual story of the 300. Like they were fighting for their boyfriend,
Yeah.
um, and so um, and at the same time that you probably you were born, you have the rise of Christian
Hmm.
nationalism, which really took root in Appalachia thanks to Ronald Reagan. And really, even before then, the defunding of education, after the Cold Wars, things started getting pulled back and away from Appalachia.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it's one of the worst funded education states, lowest rated education
Hmm.
states, and that was done
Hmm.
intentionally, um, to keep Appalachians who had started a war
Hmm.
for equality, to keep them oppressed. They turned redneck into a derogatory
Hmm.
term. They made it be a bunch of dumb overall wearing, moonshine drinking, uneducated people. And let me tell you something, if you were smart enough to make moonshine, you can probably work for NASA
Yeah.
because you can easily blow yourself up.
In fact, who wrote Rocket Boys? He was Appalachian, and he actually was
Yeah.
inspired by moonshine.
Yep.
The first rocket he ever built was made of moonshine.
Listen, moonshine brought us NASCAR.
Yes. No, you're right. And I remember watching a documentary where someone at CBS was talking about how there was almost a government directive in the late 1960s. So when
60s.
you have the coal miners fighting back, suddenly television says kill anything green. That was it was not the kill
Yep.
green. So all of these shows like um, Petticoat Junction or even Green Acres that in some way, even if they did it through stereotype, were celebrating, were suddenly cut and everything was about what was urban. It was, and then the stereotype had no way to be endeared. It was just like let's shit on these people and shit on these people and again.
Yep.
Yeah, and so
And then you get Steven Seagal movies like Fire Down Below and all that, where it's like all of these
I
Appalachians are just a bunch of people dumping chemicals into the mountains and taking advantage of everybody.
yeah, and and that's how quickly they were able to change not only the opinions of people outside of Appalachia, but even within Appalachia. My papaw fought for unions so hard. Like one of my primal memories is him
Same.
getting this union flag out and explaining to us what a union was and why it was so important, and telling me the story of some man that got killed and pointing to like where he was buried. And I was like, well, who killed him? And he was like, you don't need to know that, and that's why we have unions. But the idea was like
Yeah.
we will protect each other from this threat. My brother,
I had family members who wouldn't go outside at night until the day that they died, because they were terrified of union breakers.
yeah. Whereas my brother was of the generation that gladly got rid of unions because they were told that they would get a raise if they got rid of unions, and they got a raise for 2 minutes before they shut the mines down for mountaintop removal.
Yeah.
That's the
Yep. Yeah, that is the that is the moment whenever they pulled back the education and then they convinced through, Reaganomics and Nixon's policies too, but that they didn't need to have the unions. They didn't need to be a part of it. Unions are bad. Unions are this. Unions are just trying to take your money. Unions are just trying to make you poor. Unions are just trying to suck the blood from you. Unions tie the hands of the company to actually feed you. Yada
Yeah.
yada yada
Whereas
yada yada.
I feel guilty because I know there is no way I can contribute financially enough to make up for all that my union has done for me. I don't even understand how the model works, given what I have to pay in versus what they have done for me.
Right.
But yeah, that's so for me. I was talking to Robert Guy the other day about. He was referencing all these things super nearby where I grew up that are doing the Lord's work, doing good stuff. Do you know about Appod blah 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 or Appalachian something fun? And I was like, I don't. And he goes, well, how do you not know about these things? They were like 10 miles away from you. And I said, because at the time of my life when I left Appalachia, the word Appalachia to me meant anti-gay. The word Appalachia meant something pretty bad. And so like I would have avoided the term. And it was weird because I go out into this world that's going to like make fun of how I talk and where I come from. And I'm going to obviously defend where I come from. Yet simultaneously, I want nothing to do with it.
Oh yeah.
And so thinking about the way that to some extent, a lot of good people have been sacrificed by Appalachians who were so scarred from the behaviors of outside people that they've developed coping mechanisms that are bad, but at least be understood. So that's what I kind of do. I remember like all those really good parts of my childhood, and I tell myself time is illusory. At the end of the day, it's not real. And I sustain myself with the communion I took 30 years ago. Because I'm not going to get that communion again. There's never going to be a world, where my aunt says, "Actually, we love you," and it's okay. That world's never going to be here. So I can be
Right.
resentful, or I can try to understand where she's coming from, offer her the love that she would never offer me, and move forward, taking Appalachian values, real Appalachian values, not Appalachia when
Right.
it's courageous and not when it's afraid, because that's when it's at its best.
Yeah, exactly. And that is the actual spirit of Appalachia is, when you are being oppressed, you take the boot off your neck. But historically, the spirit of Appalachia has been that there has been so many races around you to help you pull that boot off your neck. And now everybody has left while the boot is on the neck of Appalachia. And so they already feel abandoned, they already feel left out. They're already kind of secluded and they are just being pumped full of this idea from churches, from media, that there's this gay agenda out to demonize the world and take the kids. And it's like there's no religious structure that combats that really. There's no education system that is set up to combat that.
Sweet Andy Bashir said this perfectly to me. The way that
I'm so glad. I'm so glad Kentucky is keeping
I
him.
am too. I love him to death, and a part of I've wrote the op-ed for MSNBC. Should he be elected or should he be chosen? So like
And he should have
a
been,
small part of
by the
me
way.
wanted that, but they made a really good choice too. So I'm also happy there.
Yes.
But I know okay, the GOP is anti-LGBTQ, but the GOP is anti all kinds of things. If it's not straight, white, Christian, male, rich, they hate it. And they'll cycle in, when
I mean, they're even
right.
anti-autistic.
They absolutely are, and they're anti anyone who needs any help, and not that the
Yes.
person inherently needs help. They create a structured world that works for them.
Keeps us
Yeah.
down. It works against us. It allows discrimination against
Well,
us.
and even more than that, I think they create a world that works well for them and then blame you if it doesn't work for you. We could just as easily create. It's not about someone needing help. It's about us needing help to confront the structures they've created, right? So,
Right.
but Andy Bashir. So I'm like, I know that they, this month, the GOP hates Muslims, and next month they're going to hate black and brown people, and next month it's queer people. But it shifted real hard about 4 years ago, and queer people became like target number one.
Yes.
And this, or 2 years ago, and this was literally when I was teacher of the year for the state of Kentucky. So it was like suddenly I go from just being some random teacher to being the teacher that like people are saying, like, I
Paying
hope you
attention to.
die, calling me every vicious thing you can imagine. So Andy Bashir was in my town, and he pulled me aside, and he said, what's particularly disgusting in this moment is people, when they think their kids are in danger, are now in their most primal state. And when people say someone's trying to hurt your kid, they're not going to take the time and ask, is this true? Am I hurt? Is it unfair to this person that someone said this? Their first response is going to be to try to protect their kid, and they'll ask questions later. And what's difficult about the work you're doing, Willie, is that you're going to walk up in front of these people and take off your armor so that they might take off theirs. Because otherwise, there's no way we can actually move forward. There's no way to combat this system. And
Boy, he sounded like Martin Luther King
he's
Jr.
a genius. But the more I thought about that, the more I thought this had to happen because abortion fell. Abortion was the big scary boogeyman for the longest time because they could use it as a threat against children. They could say children are being hurt.
Now they needed a new
And
threat.
they needed a threat against children. So suddenly, anyone that they can use this against, that's how they're doing it. So LGBTQ people against children, teachers hurting children, librarians hurting children, even Democrats, like the stories they tell that the Democrats
Yes.
are eating or molesting.
I, it's drinking
Yeah.
and the whole, I don't even. I'm afraid to. I'm afraid TikTok will take this whole thing down if we get into that part.
But you're right.
It's gross.
Yeah, and the sad thing is it works on that very same principle. The principle.
And it's what Germany was pushing against that other group of people that's kind of doing the same thing now against another group of people. The same messaging has been recycled all even in now in our circles. It's the same exact messaging for hundreds of years in order to segregate people.
I actually read that one of the tactics. So Berlin was like this super liberal, even by today's standards, place in the 1920s and 30s. And so one of the tactics that the Nazis would do was they would actually hire boys, like 14, 15-year-old boys, and literally force, or hire is probably not the right word, force. They would force these boys to go try to have sex with men. And even if it took 100 men to get through, when the 100th man did it, then they would say, look, they're harming kids, they're pedophiles. And they did the same thing to Jewish people.
Well, and that's kind of happening in Ireland right now as well.
So it's intentional, and it's something that has worked over and over and over for fascism.
Yep. And it's what it's what the Israelis are doing to the Gazans, the Palestinians, my wife's people. It's a vicious cycle, and it's like, is no one intelligent enough to just open your eyes and realize that this is not black versus white, this is not Jew versus Muslim, this is rich versus poor, and that is what it has always been.
This is
And Christian nationalism and white supremacy is the controlling factor in that.
You're absolutely right. It's those in power wanting even more of it, and those in power being threatened. And I think the world we were trending towards before 2016 to some extent, before 9/11 to some extent,
Really, before nine
yeah,
eleven,
was
that's when
yeah,
it.
it was terrifying for them because they were like,
Yeah.
oh, white kids and black kids in school together, and they like each other, and black culture is becoming a
Cool. Oh my God, we got a white rapper now.
yeah,
We really got to shut this
yeah,
down. Eminem come on the scene, and
yeah,
it's like, oh, everybody
and
went
then
nuts.
suddenly everyone's your enemy. Everyone's
Yep.
your enemy,
Right.
and Appalachia did not escape that unscathed. Um,
No, no. Well, and because Appalachia already felt like most people were their enemy, they already felt judged and gawked at whenever people came through. Because we do live different. Like we don't care about the amenities of this world. We care about the simplicities of this world. We care about the functionality of things, not the beauty of things. We care about values. We care.
and
There's no other place that embodies the original meaning of "Don't Tread on Me" than the mountains of Appalachia.
and this is where liberals have done such a piss poor job over and over again.
Well, especially, I don't even, and I love the men, especially Clinton and Obama.
Well, and I won't even speak to a specific person. It's just in general what liberals
In
do. What they
general,
do is they mock a particular place. The same elite coastal liberal person who is mocking hillbillies and mocking dumb poor people thinks, well, it doesn't really matter they don't even think it actively. It's all subconscious, but they think it doesn't
right,
really matter how we talk about these people because we're going to give them high-speed internet and they're going to vote for us. And when people
right,
say, why do Appalachians vote against their own interests? They don't understand that Appalachians aren't interested in high-speed internet as much as they're interested in dignity. And
and
yeah,
jobs.
the Republican Party will never give them dignity. The Republican Party
No,
will never actually care about. I'm sorry. The Republican Party will never actually care about them. The Republican Party will never actually give them jobs. The Republican Party will never actually deliver on any of the promises. But it looks at them and it says, "Hey, you're there, and we see you." And
yeah,
it doesn't, on the surface, mock them or make fun of them. It tells them that they matter and they're important, which liberals haven't done since the 1960s.
no. I mean, and maybe this is just the Appalachian in me, but like when you say something like Hillary, for instance, and to me, when one of the things that damaged Democrats in Appalachia so bad was when Hillary was running, she said, "Build your coal plants and I'll bankrupt them."
Mm.
And she didn't come back and say, "Because we're going to replace them with all of this yada 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 yada. We're going to bring in on all this top flat, beautiful mountaintop land. We're going to bring in resorts on some of
Mm.
it. On other parts to highlight and give more access to the Appalachian Trail. On this section of forgotten, abandoned coal mines, we're going to put tons of wind turbines, and these mountains are going to give your whole state energy. Like, and we're going to hire all the locals to run it. Like, they didn't do that. They didn't do that at all. They didn't invest in the national parks. They didn't increase job. They just took away the
Hmm.
mines
And extracting
and
something
left
that's
them.
here, even if it's something that itself has been extracting, um, is a problem. And I know that,
Well, and then also those coal companies still own that land. And so the cities that are around all this gorgeous land can't access it because companies like Tico Coal Company still own millions and millions of acres of Appalachia, and they won't let anyone touch it.
mhm.
And it is stunting the economy. It is stunting growth. And that is why people view it, and they blame that has been painted on Democrats, whether it is or isn't. It's really the coal companies but it's painted on
Yeah,
Democrats.
even the little snippet of her sentence, there are going to be a lot of coal miners without jobs. And I know that she later finished the sentence and said, and that's why,
Right.
but if you are culturally aware of a group, then you know not to even utter those words together. And the reason that she wasn't culturally aware is that no one really cares about dumb hillbillies. And
Which is crazy because she's from Arkansas.
yeah,
You know,
I think
like,
she's someone who, in many ways, I admire. But she's also a person who spends her time and energy thinking about money, and she's also and powerful people, and she's also got whole groups
yep.
that work for her. But it's really rare for these groups to employ rural people. I know because the American Federation of Teachers went out of its way to make sure that they had a rural voice on their queer task force.
Right.
I have seen the work of national queer organizations. I won't even say which ones. So just to be clear, American Federation of Teachers, they do everything right. They are getting this right. But I've seen other national orgs absolutely not know what they were doing. I went to a session once run by a very, very big LGBTQ group in this country. And the session was on like all of the anti-LGBTQ laws that are being passed for and how those are affecting schools.
Yeah.
So, mind you, these are being passed in rural red states. These are hurting rural people. And so we were listening to someone from California talk about the effects here, and the question was asked: how do we prepare and help? What can we do? And I kid you not, the response that was given by someone giving a presentation on this topic was, well, a lot of people are going to be moving into your areas, so we really want to create welcoming spaces. And I'm now in the group thread being like, hi, here are 20 places you can go to actually do some work. Here are 20 groups that can use your money, can use your attention, can use you sharing about them. It
That's a perfect segue for us to talk about the two things. First, just so people know, my family has been in Appalachia 1600s,
Mhm.
not counting however long the small amount of indigenous that I have left in my DNA had been there. I don't know how, the African, yeah, it cuts off at 1860 something and it doesn't go any further, of course, but the Scott part, the Irish part, I mean, I have Squire Boone in my family. And the Fugits, of course, Martin Fugit, the famous blue family. That is my like seventh great grandpa. And he did not marry his cousin. Internet, just so you know. His wife was from Scotland and he was from France. How were they related? They had a same genetic bug similar to red hair that if two people carrying it mate, it gets handed off. And that's all it was. That's how their skin turned blue. It's a way that the oxygen interacts with the blood. It was not incest. Stop it. Stop it, stop it, stop it. Now, so with that said, um the JD
Mm.
Vance, um he makes some pretty wild claims about Appalachia, but also I feel like he is someone like you were just describing. He might have these lofty ideas from his outside perspective where he lives in San Francisco about how to fix
Mm.
Appalachia, but he has got no clue how to be on the ground
Hmm.
and interact with those
Yeah,
people.
and first rule in teaching: if you don't like a kid, the kid will not learn from you. Period. Yeah,
Fact.
the kid knows. The kid knows how you feel about them, and I think it goes even deeper than that. Real teaching is about looking at someone and imagining, hopefully, what they might be by seeing the good in them, right? And then creating
Right.
avenues for them to fulfill that sort of promise of the goodness. J.D. Vance detests Appalachians and makes it abundantly clear in Hillbilly Elegy that he hates Appalachians and thinks that they are the the scum of the earth, violent, listless,
Yes.
hopeless group.
Now, if you've seen the movie and not read the book, you don't have
Yeah,
context.
this is why a lot of people defend the book based upon the movie. Here's the movie. The,
It
it
wasn't that
wasn't,
bad.
and a lot of otherwise progressive people claim that it is, and I think it's just because they hate him. But I know that
Yeah.
story. I have nothing against his story. The
No.
immediate story of his own life, I don't pretend didn't happen, because
No, and I can't pretend that I don't align
yeah,
with it.
it same here. It absolutely mirrors my life in a lot of different ways. The
Yes.
people, the drug abusers around you who bring you down, the people who you want to have faith in who consistently let you down. This feeling like everything is stacked against you and you have to keep fighting. That was absolutely my story, and I went to New England, and here's where I think our stories
Yeah.
divide.
I went to Kansas
Yeah.
City.
Uh, when I got to New England and met rich people, I was like, oh, they're exactly the same. They're exactly the same. When a poor person who's working at CVS becomes addicted to drugs, they have two options. They can either continually be addicted to drugs, or they can lose their job, because you can't get treatment without losing everything. Treatment itself is a
Right.
privilege, not just because you can afford it, but because undergoing it doesn't up. I mean,
It stays on your record
yeah,
forever.
and if you're rich and you go get treatment, there's people taking care of you. You don't.
Lawyer gets it taken
Yeah.
off.
Whereas if you're poor, it's an entirely different thing. Every single vice that he describes, there's a scene where a mother and father and their kid go into a toy store, and the kid, the guy who's running the store, basically like sees this poor kid, and is like, "Don't touch my stuff," in a condescending way. So the parents like flip out, go in, and trash the place. And
That's not an
I
Appalachian
don't think
thing.
it is either. But I'm saying that even that trait, there are rich people who would walk into that store and in the same situation would decide to ruin that business and ruin that person's life. They just do it in a different way. So there's not a single impulse that he attributes to poor Appalachians or people living in poverty that doesn't exist in rich people. It's just in rich people it looks different because they have different resources. And
Yeah.
I saw that and said, "Oh, we're all basically the same. It's just easier for some people." And JD Vance saw that and said, "Wow, that's what I want to be. I want to be that
Yeah.
person because it's so much better." And if you watch the movie versus I had to reread this book last week. He also over and over and over again paints Appalachians in a very specific way, and not just his immediate family. He actually says it. This is
He broad paints it.
this is the most damning thing that he says. So here he's talking to people living in Michigan, Indiana, Illinois. He says, if there is any temptation to think that these problems are narrow concerns of backwoods hollers, a glimpse at my own life reveals that Jackson, Kentucky's plight has gone mainstream. Thanks to the massive migration from the poorer regions of Appalachia to places like Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Pennsylvania, and Illinois, hillbilly values spread widely along with hillbilly people. So he first paints hillbillies as these horrible, awful people and says, don't think that just because you're not there it doesn't affect you, because they've already moved there. And politically, this is really smart, because it says to that
Right.
person who's barely making it,
It plays into
yeah,
it.
who's barely making it in Detroit, who's barely making it in Canton, Ohio. And they're saying, do you know why you're not making it? Because of those poor hillbillies in your town. And it creates a line, just like that line we were talking about earlier, between good poor person and bad poor person. And who's the bad poor person? The hillbilly. And if
The hillbilly.
acts like a hillbilly, then they are a hillbilly. And if they don't, they're not. It's kind of like people who will say, when you catch, say, a priest doing something, or when you catch a Christian person doing something terrible, and they'll say, well, they're not Christian because they did that. And we're like, but they did that and they're Christian, right?
They were a pastor, bro.
Yeah. It's like they get their cake and eat it too. They get, oh, look how
Right.
wonderful we are. And they'll point to themselves as being wonderful. And in the moment that they do something bad, they're like, oh, that didn't count. So that's the same thing that he does. He he paints the problem as Appalachian people. He even says specifically, there is, let me see if I can find it because it's so disgusting.
The culture of laziness, basically,
Oh,
is how
he absolutely does. He says that there aren't any problems in Appalachia that were. He says the problems that people living in Appalachia have were not created by governments or corporations or anyone else. I don't remember it being individuals in Appalachia who created opioids. I don't remember it being individuals in Appalachia who refused to regulate those opioids. I don't remember it being individuals in Appalachia who forced themselves to work at gunpoint. I don't remember it being individuals in Appalachia who took away their own school funding. I believe that was governments, and I believe that was corporations.
Yep.
If you look at,
Yep. It
I don't know if
was.
you know the Rose case. 1980s. Do you remember the CARA reform? Because your teachers would have been talking about it. So, late 1980s, effectively, there was a lawsuit that determined that the Kentucky Constitution guarantees that every single child in the state of Kentucky would have an equitable education. And what they found was Appalachians have a piss poor education compared to everyone else. So you are required by law to fix it. And if you measure the amount of money that schools had compared to the amount of the average salary of the person in the town the school's servicing, these things get better and better, better and better until about 1997. And then the tax changes, Kentucky becomes predominantly GOP, and suddenly things get worse, worse, and worse again. And we're already back to where we started.
Yep.
And again, these were not individuals in Kentucky doing this to themselves. This was literally the government taking away opportunities.
No, my biology teacher literally taught creationism in public school and told us evolution was a lie. Like public school with no punishment. And this was normal. Like this wasn't abnormal at all. You were weird if you believed in evolution. Because that's the culture that had been created from for the 40s and the 50s and beyond. It was really the culture that was forced upon us, similar to the way that the Reagan administration forced things into the hood. Well, what would become the hood. They did this. They did it to us first. And so to blame us for that, and then call us lazy for that, and to say that this is one of the quotes. So he did an interview with the Hoover Institute, and this is some of the stuff that he says. They say that the Scott Irish were here in the late 1800s, where Scotland was in complete turmoil, and they brought all of that violence subculture with them to Appalachia. Scotland was an uncivilized people, while southern England was civilized and educated. So those people who didn't fit in with the civilized people on the coast moved into Appalachia and brought their violent ways with them, which is why to this day Appalachia is one of the most violent areas in the country. And Appalachians typically, when they go other places in the United States, don't fit in anywhere.
If we don't fit in, it has nothing to do with violence, because I'm one of the least violent people on planet Earth, and I was not happy other places because of classism. I was not happy other places because they mocked accents, because they were frankly ignorant.
Oh, I literally tried to take away my accent because of that.
Yeah. This is J.D. Vance in a nutshell. He lives to wear the identity so that he has the cred to shit on it.
Right.
And he creates distance in his own narrative to make it look as if he has done some extraordinary thing by lifting himself up out of a holler that he didn't grow up in. And
he didn't grow up in it.
In fact, The advantages that he had were a grandpa who had a union job, and that union job who allowed him to secure a house that probably by today's standards cost a couple $100,000, and who got
He was definitely middle
for sure.
class, upper middle
His
class.
mom had a degree, a friggin' 4-year
Yes.
degree.
Yeah.
So I don't again, I don't take away from some of the things that happened to him in his life. But
No.
from where I come from, he was in the top, quartile by living in an expensive house and having Papa with a union job and working in a department store. He paints this as like,
Having a dad.
oh, yes, yes.
Yeah. Having male figures in your life, like having. Come on, man. Like, first off, his family left Jackson in the 40s.
Yeah.
And Middleton, Ohio is not Appalachia proper. Is it technically Appalachia foothills? I think there is some mountain, like hillish mountains like that surround the area, but come on.
Yeah.
You're not in Appalachia.
By no
And-
definition of Appalachia are you in Appalachia either.
And by the time he was born, his family had been out of Appalachia for over 20 years. His mom would have had no context for Appalachia. Everything that she would have encountered would have come from this place in Ohio.
I have a student, for example, whose mother is French. Her mother was born in France. This student has been to France multiple times and knows her French family. She is as American as cornbread and hot dogs. Like, there is nothing French about this girl at all. And I think her mom moved to the United States in the 1990s, but where you are raised is your identity. Obviously, your family might have some traits that connect back to something else, but to say that she is French would be a closer thing than for J.D. Vance to say that he's Appalachian, because she's only, 10 years removed from France, and her literal mother was French and speaks French. Yet it would be ridiculous for her to say she is. For him to be 90 years removed from Appalachia,
Jackson.
yeah, to suddenly then claim that he is Appalachian, it's insanity.
To quote Andy Bashir, he ain't from here.
No, I think
He's not like us. He's not like us.
I think he must have some memories of seeing coal miners with dark coal under their eyes, and that's why he's suddenly putting on this eyeliner. I think he didn't know that it was an eyeliner.
Oh my gosh. All right, so I know you got a meeting coming up, so real quick, everyone, right here or somewhere through here, this Temu code will take you to a shop and save you 30%. And I know a lot of you people have heard that Temu is some Chinese company ripping all your money off, but if you look on the app now, you'll see all of the local options, which is people in your area selling stuff on the app. And so the code's going to be right here. Also, if you go over to TikTok, or if you're watching this on TikTok, Showcase has all kinds of redneckery going on. So make sure you check out that. Any final words you want to leave us with?
JD,
Appalachian Talk.
yeah, that JD Vance is a Rust Belt charlatan, and if he needs somebody to translate this episode into English for him, he can gladly pay me or any other real Appalachian.
JD Vance is more crooked than a pig's tail.
Yes, he is.
He's as side-goggling as high as Route 23. And he probably don't even know what side-goggling means.
Or what Route 23 is.
Or what, Country Music Highway. Loretta Lynn, thank you very much.
Although, to be fair, I do think he references it in his book.
He might, but he ain't no coal miner son.
Well, no, and he references 23. He references 23 as the way out of Jackson. 23 is not the way out of Jackson. You'd have to go over to at least Prestonsburg to hit 23. That's a good point.
Hal Rogers Parkway, or the Mountain Parkway, is the way out of
Right.
Jackson.
But love his heart. He'll learn one day.
Poor fella. All right. Well, it has been great.
Yes, you too.
We would definitely do this again. And so, if you didn't take anything from this episode, this is what it boils down to. JD Vance doesn't like Scottish people. He thinks that we were violent when we came over here. And he is the Benedict Arnold of our culture. The Drake, if you need a better reference. If he is Appalachian, he is a WAP without papers. That is everything. And stay on for a second, let this upload, Will. And you guys have a great one.